All right, we are recording. I am going to spend some time with you today talking about why I chose van life or a nomadic lifestyle. And this is going to be a raw, unedited video. I do have some talking points written down, but otherwise, we're just going to jump right into it. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I live in this self-converted 2021 Ford Transit with my dog Blaze. I am currently down in Florida, and I was able to leave Blaze at my parents' house in North Carolina, so I am all by my lonesome. And I want to spend some time just sharing with you my story and how I got here. Because it's been many years in the making. I started back in 2016 hiking weekly and starting to go on adventures, sometimes with myself, by myself, but the majority of the time with friends or family. At the same time, I was contemplating divorce, and I had threatened it once before. I had been unhappy for a very long time, and those moments spent on the trail for hours sometimes were opportunities for me to reflect and for me to talk through with one of my good friends about the choice that I was facing. And it was not an easy choice. It took me many years from that point forward to finally come to the conclusion of separation and then divorce. I fell in love with hiking. I love to be outside, and I discovered or had a realization around that same time that I wanted to live my life to the fullest. I wanted to experience everything that nature had to offer, everything that life has to offer. And I wasn't willing to sit still or be complacent or lazy or just not do anything about it. And so that's partially why I started hiking instead of doing what some other people were doing, which was drinking every weekend and sitting by a pool. That, I realized, for me was just not how I wanted to spend my free time. So I started hiking weekly, and I would invite friends with me. Then I started yoga teacher training. And that was eye-opening. It was the first time that I practiced mindfulness and became very aware of my thoughts and my actions and the reasons behind them and the choices I was making or choosing not to make. And that created a whirlwind of deep work, deep reflection, deep, honest acceptance of myself and how I got to where I was at that moment in time. I separated from my now ex in 2017, put the house on the market, and sold it. I used the part of the proceeds from that to take my first ever trip out west, which was mind-blowing, y'all. We went to Utah, traveled out west with a really good friend, went to Utah, went to Red Rocks, went to Zion, went to Bryce, went back to Zion. And I just fell in love with the diverse landscape. I even remember asking, are we even on Earth right now? Like, how is this possible? And so my amazement and wonder of the landscape and what is just possible was open. My eyes were open, and I could not believe what I was seeing. From there, I figured out and purchased all of the gear to start going backpacking. And this was when I turned 40. This was 7 years ago. So this lifestyle has been 7 years in the making. I started backpacking, and it took me some time to gather all the gear. I was living by myself, and I took some classes from REI, and I watched as many videos as I could on YouTube. I read as much as I could. I went to REI. I purchased all the gear. And for my 41st birthday, I went on my first ever trip out into the wilderness all by my lonesome. And I hiked 22 miles. I spent one night out in the wilderness along the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. And it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. It not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and it was also one of the most rewarding things that I ever did. And from that moment forward, I decided that for my birthday, I was going to be on trail, I was going to be camping, there was going to be a campfire, whether it was by myself or with friends. That was a conscious decision of this is how I want to spend my free time. Yet again, more time out in the wilderness. Then I got friends either back into backpacking, or I got 3 friends to buy all the gear so that we could go backpacking together. And I went backpacking in the Grand Canyon. That was amazing. It was also not very smart, but we landed in, I think it was Vegas, drove to the Grand Canyon, and showed up, got a permit first thing. As soon as the doors opened, we got a backcountry permit, weighed our packs, and then we got on trail. And we only spent one night. We went down the South Kaibab Trail. I always wanted to call it the Kebab Trail. It was just easier. And then we went up Angels, I think? Yeah, I don't remember the exact trail names, but we went down 5,000 feet. We spent the night. I got to look at the most glorious night sky. Down there, there is no light, and you are encouraged to use a headlamp with a red light. No white lights are allowed, so that everyone can experience the dark sky. So we went down and we came back up. Only one night, y'all. I do not recommend this. I was also much younger than I am right now, and it was, again, one of the most challenging and rewarding things that I have ever done. Also in 2017, I started my second level, or my 500 hour of yoga teacher training, which is also just mind-blowing in the personal growth and development and mindfulness and awareness, and just how spending that time doing that deep work can create such a different perspective and appreciation and gratitude for this life and create forward progression or movement towards creating a life that you want for yourself. And not, again, getting back to not being complacent, not being still. All this time I was teaching yoga, I was doing my YTT for my 500, that's yoga teacher training for my second level of yoga teacher training. I was transitioning from full-time work to really wanting to become a full-time yoga teacher. I didn't necessarily want to open up a yoga studio, but I wanted to teach full-time. So I transitioned from a very cushy, nice salary and a nice apartment to moving in with roommates, renting a bedroom, and moving in. I downsized my belongings or put them into storage. I became a freelancer and worked, 10 hours or 15 hours a week. And then I was teaching yoga. And that was the first time I ever felt the most free. I had more control over my schedule and more freedom. I would go hiking and chill in a hammock and read a book in the middle of the afternoon while everybody else was working. Because I could make my own hours and I could make my own schedule. And it was amazing. And then COVID hit. And that just put my life partially on pause for many of us. It just took everything and flipped it upside down completely. And it also brought another level of growth, right? There was a lot of stillness and quiet and solitude in those first 3 months of COVID when we were in complete lockdown. I wrote a book in that time, and a couple months later, but I started really writing the initial phases of that book. I started creating content more so on Instagram, and I also started creating content on YouTube. I started producing yoga videos, which are still on this channel, so if that's something you're interested in, feel free to check those out. And I bought this fancy camera right here that I have no idea how to use, and I'm still figuring it out, especially from a photography standpoint. Videography is a little easier, I think, at least for these types of videos. But yeah, COVID hit and I stopped teaching. I completely lost my yoga community, which I have been grieving over for the past couple years. I just miss it so much, and yet I love the amount of freedom and adventure that this lifestyle offers, and so right now it's a trade-off. Around the same time, I was still living with roommates. I was in an apartment. I considered moving into a one-bedroom apartment, and I was transitioning back towards working more hours, doing what I do for a day job, and less teaching because I wasn't teaching. It was COVID. And that meant that I could move into an apartment by myself. I could finally afford it again. But the leasing office made a huge mistake and just pissed me off royally that I used it as a reason to justify putting everything back into storage and moving in with my parents and trying to do some version of this van life. I had heard about van life and minimalism back in 2016. It was now 2020, the fall of 2020. and I moved in with my parents. Just imagine being 44 and moving back in with your parents. But I was by myself. I was by myself, and I really wanted to give this lifestyle a go. I wanted to at least try it and experience it and see, like, is this something that I really want? At that time, they had just gotten their first Class A, and they had had 2 travel trailers before that. And so they were familiar with RV living, not full time, but traveling in an RV for extended periods of time. And so I kind of used their wisdom and their experiences and also their encouragement. Like, they encouraged me to move in with them. They saw it as an opportunity, I'm assuming, to help me fuel this passion of spending more time outside. So I tried to convince my dad primarily, because he would be the one who would help me to build the van. And he was not taking the bait. And I had no clue. Like, I had been watching YouTube videos, van tours, van builds, time lapses, everything to try to absorb and gain as much knowledge as I could about what it takes to build one of these things. Because it is no small feat when you do it yourself. And at that time, I didn't really see any solo females doing it. It was a lot of guys and couples building them out. And I decided, rather than go through the process of building a van, I bought a used 2018 Airstream base camp. It's like one of their smallest travel trailers. It was only 16 feet, but it got me on the road. I spent 6 months learning how to tow, learning all of the ins and outs of the system, upgrading the batteries from AGM batteries and to lithium. We installed a brake controller on my Honda Pilot, and I went for it. Before that, I bought the Honda Pilot so that I could go car camping. And I don't mean setting up a tent. I slept in that car multiple times by myself and with friends at trailheads along the Appalachian Trail. And that was my first foray into solo travel and into getting more comfortable with being by myself in a vehicle, sleeping overnight in a Cracker Barrel parking lot or at a trailhead. And it was scary and exciting and exhilarating all at the same time. And I did it in baby steps. So if this is something you're interested in, my process was baby steps. So back to the Airstream. I traveled out west in March of 2021 is when I left North Carolina. And I went out west with my cat, Carmi. And we went to New Mexico. We went to Colorado. I went over to Utah. Back to New Mexico. Back to Colorado. And at that point, I was 10 weeks into traveling. I had gone to some national parks that I hadn't been to before, like Black Canyon of the Gunnison. I camped in BLM in Canyonlands, which I didn't get a chance to go to when I was in Utah the first time. And I got my COVID shots in New Mexico, and I explored some other places in New Mexico, which is just a gorgeous, gorgeous state. And I did it initially with the intention of seeing as many national parks as I possibly could, which equated to burnout for me. And I quickly discovered that being on the road by yourself, there's a lot of solitude to it. And because I was traveling so quickly, and because I was towing, I found it very stressful and very exhausting. Just the setup, the tear down, the travel time, it's just so, for me, it was too much. I know other people do it, and maybe it was the way in which I was traveling at the time. The fact that I would, be in one place for a day or two, and then I would break camp and go somewhere else. And I was driving 6 hours at a time to cover distance and go from point A to point B and get to where I wanted. And it was just too much. And I realized I was burnt out because I was parked on, I think it was National Forest or BLM, just outside of Pikes Peak. And the road was closed at that time. And this was in late May, early June, I think, of 2021. And I wanted to go to Garden of the Gods, but my goal was to see, how quickly could I get through it. And if you're somebody who wants to spend time out in nature, that should not be the goal. And that was when I realized, holy cow, I'm doing this completely wrong, and I am so burnt out from this entire experience. So I made the decision at that moment. I was like, all right, let's go home. And there was so much relief in that. I was bawling as soon as I got on the highway and left Denver and was driving through the desert and heading east. I just cried. And I made my way home. I think in 4 or 5 days, I made it back to North Carolina, which is my home state. And I put the base camp on the market immediately. And I sold it within a month of being back home. And I moved into an apartment in a small town where I had a lot of hiking options around me, which was a really, really good decision for me. And I could walk into town, which was also a really good decision. And those were two things that I learned that I needed or I wanted when I was on the road. From that moment, I pondered what was next. I wasn't sure that I wanted to travel full time, and I also wasn't sure that I really wanted a van. At that time, I considered getting a Tacoma and doing a rooftop tent, but I couldn't afford a Tacoma on the income that I was making at the time. So I bought something more affordable, and I used the proceeds from the sale of the base camp and trading in my Pilot. I bought a Subaru Forester, and I loved that car. It was beautiful. It was brand new. It had almost all the bells and whistles, and from the time I bought that car and around the same time, I took a trip with my mom and my good friend that I've traveled with many, many times before. We went to Glacier National Park. We spent a week there. We went to the Tetons and we went to Yellowstone. And while I was out there, I was like, I so badly want a van. but I still wasn't ready yet. And so when we came home, I bought a rooftop tent. My mom and I drove to Tennessee or Kentucky, I don't remember, around Christmas, and I bought the tent. He had it on a pulley system, so he placed it on the van, which was, or not the van, sorry, the Subaru Forester, placed it on it, made it look so easy peasy. And we got it attached, and my mom and I drove it home. And because it was winter and it was cold, I never took it camping. And by March, it was finally starting to warm up. So I took it to my parents and I was like, let's figure out how do we work this thing? And because I wanted to start going on solo trips. So we popped it open and I was like, this is amazing. It's huge. It's spacious. I can get up in it. Super easy. And then we were like, all right, let's close it. And it took the three of us to figure out how to close the darn thing the first time. And it wasn't easy, not being mounted on the Forester. So we went through a couple rounds of like popping it open and closing it, popping it open and closing it, and figuring out like the best system. But it always took two people. It had gas struts, so popping it open was no problem. But having enough leverage to pull on the strap to get one corner down was really difficult because it was on a Subaru Forester. I think if it were on a truck bed and you could get a little more leverage and you weren't like dangling over across the hood of the car and over the windshield to try to pull down, at least that was my experience, I was like, I can't use this. I'm going to have to flag somebody down on a National Forest Service road and be like, hey, random stranger, will you help me close my tent? Because I can't do it by myself. And I was getting my dog Blaze. And I knew that she was going to be around 55 pounds. And it's just me the majority of the time. And trying to lug a 55-pound dog up into a rooftop tent was just not going to be possible. So I sold the rooftop tent. Then, this is July 2023, so a year and a half ago. My parents were going to Acadia National Park in Maine, and I was like, I so want to join you. So I bought an airplane ticket, and I was like, pick me up. And then I realized that I could take my dog Blaze with me, and because there's only so many national parks that are dog friendly. And so I was like, actually, scratch that. I'm not going to fly. Blaze and I are going to drive and camp our way from North Carolina up to Maine. So we did that, and it was awesome. And I'm not sure that I would do that again in a tent with a dog. It was fine. But the coming back, it was starting to get hot because it was July. So the further south we went, I decided not to camp, and I got hotel rooms instead. And it was in that moment or along that trip that I realized that I had had this repeated experience of anytime I was traveling, anytime I was out in nature, anytime I was backpacking, I didn't want to leave. When I was in Maine, I wanted to go further. I wanted to go into Canada. I didn't want to come home. But I didn't want to live out of my Subaru Forester. So that's when I made the decision to buy this van. And I had a family reunion in August, and I told them, I was like, okay, if you're going to make this commitment, then you need to make it known right? So that maybe they'll hold you accountable if you start to backpedal and second guess your decision. And I told my family, and they were like, okay, sure. And I bought this 2021 Ford Transit extended high roof van over Labor Day weekend and picked it up about a week later. And I remember sitting there with the sales guy, and he was like, so are you going to do it? Like, I had test driven a couple vans at that time. And I knew that I didn't want a Ram ProMaster because of all the maintenance stuff. I've heard that they're just not as reliable. I didn't want the Sprinter because the maintenance costs were so high, and it's harder to find a Sprinter mechanic. And so I went with a Ford. And I chose a high roof because I wanted, if I was going to do this full time, if I was going to be on the road and live in this thing 100% of the time, then I wanted this thing to be as big and spacious and have as much storage as I could. And so that's why I went with the extended high roof. And I spent 8.5 months with help from friends and family building this bad boy out. Bad girl out? Yeah, bad girl out. She doesn't have a name. I thought about calling her the Great White or Van, or Betty White for some reason comes to mind. So if you have a van name in mind, let me know. But yeah, spent 8.5 months building it. I thought I could move in a day. It actually took me about a month, 2 weeks to a month to move in. I did a trial trip down to South Carolina with my parents for a couple days, and I made a couple modifications after that. And then I hit the road in June of 2024. And I went out west for 4 months, and it was amazing. And I went with a different intention, right? Instead of seeing how many national parks I could cover in as short a period of time as I could, my intention this time was to live and experience and to travel and go on adventures. And we did that. Blaze and I did. It was amazing. And there was a lot of solitude. And so I would seek out time with other people camping near me, or I would go into town and I would walk into a restaurant and sit at the bar and have lunch or dinner and grab a drink, and maybe somebody would talk to me, hopefully. But yeah, we were out west for 4 months, and I learned what the van was capable of. I learned how I used it. I learned about the limitations, and I learned about the kind of traveling that I wanted to experience. And that was, I really want to be out in the wild as long as I possibly can. And when I mean the wild, I mean like an hour and a half away from civilization and pretty much no other humans either. For some reason, that is, I think there's so much beauty and so much wildlife and solitude and stillness, and it's just beautiful, y'all. Just beautiful. So that meant that because I knew what the limitations were, I decided 4 months in that I wanted to come back and make some upgrades and modifications to the van. So that's where we are now. I think the other key decisions or filters or things that guided me here that I haven't mentioned yet were back in 2016, I became aware of van life. Around that same time, the tiny house movement was coming about and minimalism was coming about. And one thing I haven't shared on here yet is when I was married, when I was 34, we tried to start a family and it never happened. I went through infertility and nothing happened. I'm here all by myself. I'm divorced. I have no kids. I got a dog. I'm a dog mom. And that was probably, the infertility was one of the darkest periods in my life. Divorce was just the next step. Not that I think everyone gets a divorce after infertility, but based on the statistics that I've seen, 50% of couples do. And for me, I think because coming out of infertility, I chose not to go through IVF. I didn't want to inject those drugs into my body any longer. And I didn't want to subject myself to the emotional turmoil and mental turmoil that comes along with that experience. I didn't have the coping mechanisms that I have now that I gained from yoga teacher training. And I think, going to get emotional here. I think that was a pivotal moment for me because I chose not to do IVF and I chose not to spend $20,000 going through that process or even adopting or doing foster care. I did not make that choice lightly at all. It took many, many months. I tried acupuncture and nothing was working. And I also came to the conclusion that I don't really like babies and I don't really like kids. I only like well-behaved ones. Which probably sounds horrible and it may sound harsh, but it's the truth. As much as I thought that I wanted to be a mother, I don't think that I was designed to be one, or at least not to use that motherly, feminine energy in that way. I think I was designed to take that energy and apply it in other ways, and I've been able to do that. So I think for me, that was a pivotal decision, a pivotal moment to live child-free. And that was when all of this started. So I think also because I chose child-free, we stopped celebrating Christmas. And I took my parents a couple years to wrap their heads around this and to accept it. And myself too. We stopped exchanging gifts. And my focus, my request was, I would rather spend time with you. I don't need things. Things don't make me happy. Experiences and creating memories and sharing things make me happy. Those bring me joy. Learning new things, feeding my curiosity makes me happy. Tangible objects, like the big milestones that society likes to say brings a sense of success and brings a sense of fulfillment, those are only temporary, at least for me. Getting a house and shoving it full of material objects and wearing fancy clothes and driving a fancy car, those to me bring short-lived glimpses of happiness. They don't bring fulfillment. sharing moments with friends and family and strangers and making a difference in other people's lives, or inspiring them, or asking them the hard questions that they're not willing to face themselves, that to me brings me fulfillment. So I shifted away from achieving society's ideal path to success to creating a life that brings me joy. Not based on anybody else, me. What does Michelle need? What do you need to be happy? And that's how I ended up here. And I am so glad, as hard as it was to go through infertility, to go through divorce, to overcome all of those obstacles, and to be curious and to challenge myself to do things by myself, to learn how to go backpacking, to do it by myself, to get a dog and to train her to be on trail, and to just build a fucking van. Sorry for the language, but to build a van was such a feat. Yes, I had help, but I did a lot of this by myself, and I am so proud of it, and I am so happy that this is my home. And I think that if hearing this and learning about my journey gets you excited, or you start daydreaming, or you start considering how you could make this happen for yourself, I say go for it. Sure, there's challenges. There's going to be pros and cons for no matter what lifestyle you choose. But go for it. Start small, start big. You know, for some people, they just jump head in, feet first. I can't do that. I'm a Taurus. I like small baby steps towards something. And that's what I did. And I think for me, the pros, the reasons why I chose this over a stationary life are freedom. I crave freedom. I crave adventure. I also wanted to do this lifestyle so that I could pay down my debt and eventually become debt-free. And so that is also my goal. I clearly love to be out in Mother Nature. I know that. I want to be on top of a mountain. I want to be surrounded by stunning landscapes. And I love the solitude. I also love meeting people and spending time with them. And I love the movement. And I love the stillness. And I have my home with me no matter where I go. So those are all of the pros. And they outweigh any of the cons. So that is my story, y'all. And thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I greatly appreciate you guys being here. I am trying to become a YouTuber. I don't really want to be an influencer, but I want to be a YouTuber and continue to make content for you guys. So if this video was helpful, if me sharing my story inspired you in some way, please leave a comment, subscribe. And if you have any questions, if there's something that you want to know about van life, or if you have questions about infertility and child-free living or anything else, let me know down in the comments, and I look forward to sharing what this experience has to offer with y'all going forward. Next week's video will be about all of the upgrades and modifications that we have made over the past 2 months since I returned to North Carolina. So subscribe and stick around, and I'll see you then. Goodbye, y'all.